Hello, BookTube. You comic book fans out there will know that for a while now, Michael K. Vaughan and I have been doing a series of world's finest collaborations about comic books every Wednesday. We started out with me hijacking his Epic Wednesday concept, where he was going through Marvel's Epic Collection line, a full-color paperback reprint line from their backlog. That was great fun. He has a ton more of them than I do, and it's also clearly very much a Marvel baby, what the industry refers to as a Marvel zombie. He's very much a fan of Marvel comics, as I suspect quite a few of you are as well. So I thought it was only right to let him pick. And that has sort of frozen as the pattern in place here. And we did a lot of Epic collections, but quickly realized that it's so much fun. And that both of us have read a lot of both Marvel and DC comics. DC is the home of Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman. That we really ought to expand things to just Wednesday comics in general. And we're doing that. We've done that a couple of times. Last week we did videos where we talked about our introduction to DC comics. And that just left the question in my mind of what particular DC comic Michael was going to pick for today. And he picked a doozy. For me, he picked a doozy. He was a latecomer to the title in question, which is The Legion of Superheroes. I was not a latecomer to The Legion of Superheroes. As I mentioned in my own origin story of DC Comics, I fell in love with DC Comics because I was about to say I fell in love with Superboy, but let's keep this PG. I certainly loved reading Superboy in Adventure Comics. I loved reading The Adventures of Superboy in Adventure Comics, which made a natural transition to the Legion of Superheroes, which is our topic for today. The Legion of Superheroes is a super team of teenagers set 1,000 years in the future. It's created in 1958 by Otto Binder for an episode, just a throwaway issue of Adventure Comics starring Superboy. I don't think he guessed. I don't think that Mort Weisinger, I don't think anybody at DC Comics guessed what kind of a fan reaction they would get to the concept of a team of teenage superheroes 1,000 years in the future. They got a lot of feedback from that original issue. Do I have the? Let's find the cover of that original issue because it shows you the original gimmick. That original issue was just a throwaway thing. What if the kind of gimmicky plot of that original appearance of the Legion of Superheroes, not the whole Legion, but just the three founding members, Cosmic Boy, Lightning Lad, and Saturn Girl. The kind of founding gimmick of that first appearance was what would happen if there were an initiation to a teenage group, and the initiation contest was something that Superboy failed, even though he has greater superpowers than anybody. That was kind of the gimmick. Wouldn't that be a gas, as we used to say? Wouldn't that be fun if there were an initiation rite for basically a teenage club, a social club, and Superboy failed? He couldn't do it, and that was this issue, the legendary issue number 247 of Adventure Comics, where our trio is telling Superboy that he has failed. That he's look at how surprised he is. He's dumbfounded because they're telling him, what? They're telling him, I'm sorry, you aren't good enough for us. It's a very bare bones plot. Clark Kent is just minding his own business as a clean-cut teenager in 1950s Smallville in the American Midwest when he meets a stranger, another teenager, who introduces himself and says, hello, Superboy. And Clark Kent is taken aback and says, well, you must have me confused with the famous hero of Smallville. I'm clearly not Superboy. And then when he's in togs as Superboy fighting crime, another mysterious teenager comes along and says, hello, Clark Kent. Give my regards to your parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. Obviously, these three teenagers know something about Clark Kent that they aren't supposed to know. And that in terms of the continuity in Superboy at the time, keep in mind I'm not a big fan of continuity, but no one knew Superboy's identity at this time. At the time this issue came out, even Pete Ross didn't know. Only his parents knew that Clark Kent was also Superboy. The rest of the world certainly knew about Superboy. The rest of the cosmos did. This is the Superboy pre-John Byrne, pre the era in which John Byrne depowered Superman. This Superboy is basically a god. He can fly through outer space. He doesn't need to breathe. He can travel faster than the speed of light, that sort of thing. It's revealed in the course of this issue that these three are from the future. They're from 1,000 years in the future, and they belong to a group called the Legion of Superheroes. And as the Legion starts to reappear, this was their first appearance, they set Superboy, they take him to the future of Smallville. tall skyscrapers, all that sort of thing, monorails, monorails everywhere. They take him to the future and put him to his initiation test, and then reveal that it was all a big gag, and that they revere him, they know him from history, and they very much want him to be an honorary member of their club. That was all it was ever going to be. Was the Otto Binder gag was, what if Superboy flunked his test, even though we expect that he will pass any test in the world. But fans caught on for a number of reasons. One big reason why fans love the Legion of Superheroes is that it's a team. Fans love teams. Usually, fans love teams. This was the first super team that DC had made in 10 or 15 years, since the Justice Society of America. This is before the Justice League. Or anything else, the Teen Titans or anything like that. This was the first one that they'd done. And not only that, most of the fans that wrote in to Adventure Comics from small towns in the American Midwest and elsewhere, demanding more of the Legion of Superheroes, also loved it because there are no adults on the team. Typically, with super teams, if you had a teenage character, they were either an unsuperpowered mascot, like Snapper Carr, something like that, or they might be on the team, but they were wards and doofuses, and the team would consisted of adults, and usually a very older adult who didn't take any kind of field action, who directed the shots for everybody. The idea that a team would be entirely composed of teenagers later on, when we get more lore about the Legion of Superheroes, we're told you can't be a member of the team if you're an adult. It's a purely teenage thing. That also struck a nerve. I mean, keep in mind, we're on the doorstep of the 1960s here. No wonder this took off the way it did, and it did. It took off enormously, absolutely enormously. The Legion appeared, it reappeared some more, until finally it took off so much that it became an entity of its own. I mean, Superboy joined the team. Here you have these blue ribbon digests of various adventures of the Legion of Superheroes. Two type fonts from one era of the Legion, a type font from another era of the Legion, and then Adventure Comics. This was the last iteration of Adventure Comics. Eventually, the powers that be at DC thought, well, okay, we'll graduate this. They won't be guest stars anymore. Maybe they can have a regular backup feature of their own. And eventually, maybe even their own book. And as we got to know the Legion, here's the DC Archives edition, Legion of Superheroes #1. With great cover artwork by Curt Swan. There you'll see there's our original issue and a couple of other issues and whatnot. This is original cover artwork that Curt Swan did for this volume, and he drew the Legion of Superheroes. There is Superboy and the 3 founding members. Cosmic Boy, who's not human, he's from Brawl and has superpowers, super magnetic powers. Saturn Girl, who's not human, she's from the Saturnian moon Titan and is a telepath, and Lightning Lad, who is not human. He's from the planet Wynath, although Legion fans have been debating for 50 years whether it's Wynath or Wynath. And he has the power, as you might tell from his name, to hurl lightning bolts. So there's no one who's actually an Earthborn human on this cover. And that was another attraction of the Legion of Superheroes, is that the more we learned about them, the more we learned about their membership, which was vastly extraterrestrial. In the core, original, admittedly sprawling cast of Legion of Superheroes, there are only a few people who were born and raised on Earth. Bouncing Boy, Sun Boy, but not many. Most of them were aliens and came from wildly alien cultures. True, it was the 1950s, so most of those aliens are bipedal, basically human-looking aliens. There were a couple of exceptions, but usually it was that. You had to wait for later incarnations of the Legion of Superheroes to get aliens that look alien. But the stakes were high. That was another attraction to the Legion stories. That's their old headquarters in the background there, this building here. Another attraction was that they were not police. This future world does have something called, intriguingly, the Science Police. But they aren't part of the Science Police. They aren't part of the military. They're an independent organization on their own, funded by the richest man in the galaxy, R.J. Brand, to help out. And maybe to tackle weird, outre, extraterrestrial threats that the Science Police are not equipped to deal with, that no one's equipped to deal with. And that becomes more believable as the series goes on and the roster of the Legion expands. The roster of the Legion gradually grows and grows and grows until it's 20 strong, 30 strong even. And some of those characters are are equipped with enough power to stop an invasion of an alien space fleet all by themselves, Superboy being one of them, obviously. He starts traveling regularly to the future to have adventures with the Legion of Superheroes. First, in that first issue, he travels to the future in their time bubble, a piece of advanced technology that they use to travel through time. Later, quickly, the writers at DC decided, well, if Superboy can fly 10 times faster than the speed of light, then he must be able to break the time barrier as well as the sound barrier, and that maybe he can just fly to the future on his own power. I always thought that was a big mistake, making the future so easy that Superboy could get to it just by running fast. I always thought that was a big mistake. I was a big fan of the Legion of Superheroes right from the beginning, but I always wanted it to be a little harder for Superboy to reach the future. In these episodes, he can not only fly to the future relatively easily, it doesn't really even get him in the 30th century panting, but also in a couple of these stories, he can use super ventriloquism through time. I don't know how that works. It just became too easy. It seemed right next door. And that, I think, weakens the built-in drama of the Legion of Superheroes, which is that presumably the Legion knows what will happen to Superboy. One thing we know for sure about the 30th century where the Legion is policing Earth and fighting extraterrestrial crime, fighting all kinds of superpowered villains and whatnot. One thing we know for sure about that 30th century is that Superman is not around. Readers at the time, of course, this was at the late 1950s, the editorial bullpen at DC Comics thought comic books were for kids. So they weren't going to bring anything really major or dark up, at least at the beginning. So no one ever mentions that. No one ever dwells on it. Superboy doesn't even dwell on it. Here he is cavorting in the 30th century, having adventures with these teenagers. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. In the run of Adventure Comics up until 1958, Superboy had met some superpowered people, including, as we saw, a superpowered boy, Mars Boy, Sutri from Mars. But he hadn't been able to have adventures. He hadn't been able to just uninhibitedly be himself. In a world where he didn't have to worry about anyone recognize him as Clark Kent or anything like that. It's in a different world. It's in the future. That was wonderful, and later writers exploit that quite a bit, showing you how wonderful it would have been for Superboy, who at the time when the Legion finds him must have been the loneliest boy on Earth, to suddenly have a large crowd of people that will all have superpowers. And thanks to their first jetpacks and then anti-gravity rings, they can all fly. Every member of the Legion can fly, whether they have that as a power of their own. For instance, these three don't. They can't fly on their own. They don't have super strength or super senses or anything like that. But Otto Binder was careful to make the three founding members of the Legion of Superheroes who meet Superboy first, he was careful to give them all powers that Superboy doesn't have. Superboy has a huge panoply of superpowers. But he can't control magnetism, he can't read minds, and he can't hurl lightning bolts. So that's very interesting, and the writers of the Legion have tried to continue that. They even worked it into the Legion bylaws, in addition to not being able to be an adult as a member of the Legion. You also can't have a power that's artificial. There are always exceptions to these rules, but you can't have a power that you derive from machines. It has to be born in you somehow, or acquired by you naturally. And in addition to that, you can't have a power that explicitly duplicates the power of some other Legionnaire. Again, perhaps a hypothetical very young Steve reading these in the American Midwest might have thought that was silly. If the Legion is tasked every once in a while with repelling a Khund invasion, surely you want, if you can get them, 10 members who have Superboy's powers instead of only one. And they're willing to overlook that rule because eventually they gain a member who had occurred in Adventure Comics, a character called Mon-El, who's not from Krypton, but he's from a very Krypton-like planet, and he has the exact same powers as Superboy, only without his weakness to kryptonite. Also, very early on in the Legion's appearances in DC Comics, they recruit Supergirl from a different time period than Superman. So you're dealing with all sorts of temporal fluxes anyway. But Supergirl has literally the identical powers to Superboy, and the Legion just says, when confronted with that, as they occasionally are, they just say, well, Superboy and Supergirl are legendary figures from the past. They're an exception. Not really talking about Mon-El, I guess. And so on and so forth down the line. Like, for instance, Ultra Boy, Joe Na, from the planet Rimbor, is infused with a weird kind of radiation that gives him Superboy-level powers, super speed, super vision, super strength, invulnerability, but only one at a time. So if he's using his ultra powers to be invulnerable, then he's not super strong anymore. He still has the Legion flight ring, so he can still fly, but flight is a power of his. If he didn't have the Legion flight ring, he could use his energy to fly. And again, early fans, one vociferous early fan, wrote to DC saying, clearly that is a mental block. Energy doesn't work that way. Cellular energy doesn't work that way. Clearly Ultra Boy could use these powers all at the same time, and it's just a mental block. It's some sort of long-standing trauma resulting from how he got his powers in the first place. Did anybody listen to that overeager little boy? No. No, Ultra Boy, I would say to this day, still has that power set, but scandalously, once again, although Legion of Superheroes started in 1958 and has been, from that time till now, a rabid fan favorite, DC Comics is currently not publishing the Legion of Superheroes in any way. They aren't a guest star anywhere. They don't have a backup feature anywhere, even though DC is now doing backup features. And their continuity is an absolute mess. They got a big, big name in the comic book industry to come in. They told him, as they should never tell anyone, you have a free hand to reinvent this property. He did, and didn't get any interest because he reinvented it too much. Very simple process here. It's a very simple formula. If that writer had come in to the Legion of Superheroes and announced, this is your Legion of Superheroes, this is Superboy, only this time it will be the son of Clark Kent rather than Clark Kent himself, or you could, if you really wanted to go for the gold, have it be the adventures of Superboy. Clark Kent as a costume teenager, and to hell with DC continuity. And to hell with it. Just, you could start, DC Comics could tomorrow start publishing Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. And say, never mind the continuity, just enjoy the stories. If they did that, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, with a costumed Clark Kent as teenage Superboy, would instantly become their best-selling book. It would outsell all the Batman titles. It would outsell all the Superman titles. It would outsell all the gimmick titles that they do. They didn't do it, and they never will. I honestly don't understand. And since 2015 or so, the two major superhero comic book publishers, Marvel and DC, have adopted a quasi-official editorial stance that if we know for sure what the fans want, that is the one thing we will not do. We will not do that. You are editorially enjoined from doing that thing. I don't understand that. Maybe in 2014 or 2015, I might have understood an element of it, which was the editorial powers that be at Marvel and DC saying we'd really like to build a new audience. But that isn't working. Comics have never sold worse than they're selling now. So that isn't working. And that audience is still out there and is easily lurable back. If DC made a continuity, a lore-respecting version of the Legion of Superheroes, it would sell better than anything they have. I would be first in line at the comic shop every Wednesday to get that latest issue. They could do an issue a week of that. Just the traditional Legion of Superheroes. So no race swapping, no gender swapping, no nothing like that. Just the original characters plus plenty of new characters in new old adventures starring Superboy. If DC were to do that once a week, they would have the best-selling comic every week, and it would be that. And because they know that, they will not do it. They will not do that specific thing because they know that. I've never seen a clearer indication than the American superhero comic book industry of an industry wanting to die. So I can't say that Ultra Boy still is like that, still has one-at-a-time superpowers, but he was. For a long time, he was like that, which means that if you have a protective spacesuit that the Legion issues to all of its members so you can fly in the rigors of outer space, and if you have your flight ring so you are able to fly, then Ultra Boy is as powerful as Superboy or Monel, and there are other characters. Supergirl, of course, is at the disposal of both others. There's one character in the Legion of Superheroes, Element Lad, who can change any element into any other element. That makes him God. Including in one Legion storyline, literally, it makes him God. And of course drives him insane. Where would comic books be without powerful characters gaining more power and going insane in the process? The Legion bounced all around in its iterations. First it was guest starring in Adventure Comics with Superboy, then fans spoke out. They wanted more Legion. They wanted to guest star more, so they did. Then they kept speaking out. They said, if you make a regular backup feature, we'll buy the comic that it's in, regardless of whether or not we like the rest of the issue. We will follow the Legion. So they did. Then they gave the Legion its own book, its own regular appearances. Several times the Legion has had comics of its own, on and off, and in all kinds of various iterations. For a long, long time, for almost 40 years, the Legion did not fundamentally change. They were out in the future. They were in the 30th century. You take a time bubble, or if you're a Kryptonian, or maybe somebody of the Flash running at ultra trans-relativistic speeds, you go to the 30th century to visit them, but they're the same. If you went to the 30th century plus 20 years, you would see them as adults. But if you go to their time period, you'll get them as teenagers. And that didn't change until DC Comics made an event, a mega event, A multi-issue mega event. These are poison in the comic book industry. They should not happen. No matter how much I've loved some of them, they should not happen. And that event was Crisis on Infinite Earths, which we've mentioned in comic book videos before on Wednesdays, in which DC decided that its previous 40 years of continuity was too complicated and was driving away fans. There was no proof of that. At all. None whatsoever. The creators were bored. That's all. They used that as their justification. They said, this is too complex for new readers. Thanks for the backhanded insult to new readers. And way too convoluted for old readers. Thanks for the backhand insult to old readers who've been invested in this for a long time. We're the reason why you have a house in Scarsdale, because we have been invested in this. But feel free to turn around and crap all over us. So they made Crisis on Infinite Earths 12 issues in which they revamped continuity. They had all of reality change. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. No matter how enjoyable it was to read. Utterly ridiculous to do. And one of the big changes that they made was that Superman was no longer ever Superboy. He first put on the colorful, world-famous costume as an adult in Metropolis. He was just Clark Kent in Smallville. He was never Superboy, so the Legion of Superheroes never existed because he was their inspiration. They never came back to find him because he didn't exist. So where's the Legion, then? It required reinvention. The whole thing required reinvention. And since Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC has done at least 5 big multi-series events, all 5 of which revamped that current continuity, revamped time and reality from the revamp that was done in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So that by the time you're done with that 5th one, Infinite Crisis, or Crisis with Anchovies, or whatever it is, you have no idea. You have no idea what anything is. Far from simplifying things, it made things intensely more complex, especially for the Legion of Superheroes, which started suddenly acting like that old light bulb on your front porch that's winking out and back into existence. That is a horrible situation for a fan-beloved, revered property. DC Comics should be ashamed of itself for doing that to the Legion of Superheroes. They just sort of said the future is off limits from these things, that these big events will be affecting present reality, but that it fixes itself in the ensuing 1,000 years. They wouldn't have to go far to just say the Legion is off limits to this kind of crapola, but they didn't. Instead, they've reinvented the Legion from the ground up 4 or 5 times, virtually guaranteeing that unless you're a diehard Legion fan, you won't know what you're dealing with when you read the Legion. And they just recently did that. They got a big name, in my opinion, largely talentless, writer to come in and told him, reinvent the Legion from the ground up again. We don't care. It's only a comic book. What do we care? And that didn't work. And now the Legion is in limbo again. So there were 12 or 15 of these DC Archive editions, all with original artwork. That most of the early ones had original artwork. That's Kurt Swan. Gotta love it. And he's in this issue quite a bit. As the Legion grows and grows. You get all... I wonder if this has... often the writers would give you a gallery to show you who the Legion members are. Who knows who's dating who. No, it doesn't do it in this volume. But I'll bet it does it in these digest volumes. The Legion introduced that sort of thing. Interteen romance. And readers loved it because the readers were teenagers themselves by that point, or right on the verge, adolescents on the verge of teenagers. So in addition to outlandish science fiction stories, they also wanted to know who's boyfriend, who's girlfriend, who might be jealous of who, all that sort of stuff. That had never been done before. In a comic book team, in a teen book, that had never been done before. Also, another thing that was very interesting for the Legion is that once their numbers started, yeah, here we go, meet the Legion. You get each of the members. These are old George Perez sketches. There's Colossal Boy, who is a human being, one of the few humans on the team who was born and raised on Earth, but who can grow to gigantic size. A gimmick that never fails to infuriate continuity updaters who will always say, no. Actually, he's from a planet of giants, and his superpower is that he can shrink. They just won't leave Cosmic Boy, a Colossal Boy alone. But you've got all of these different... There's Monel, he gets a page to himself. And all of these other Legionnaires. In the comic starts to ask, who's dating who? Who has rivalries with who? And that just kept going. Because the writers kept adding characters. And more characters became more and more fan favorites. Wildfire, Dawnstar, all these characters start being added to the Legion, and fans just gobbled them up. Fans grappled them together. And started wondering, well, okay, who will they date? Who will they like? Who will they hate? And the foes of the Legion got more and more complex. The more the whole idea became fleshed out. All of a sudden, you started to develop Legion lore, and that was great. That was absolutely fantastic. Several things about the Legion have since become standard. Individuation of teenage superheroes. Suddenly, you had the Legion, and they weren't the same. These teenagers weren't the same. They were identifiably different. You could put them out of costume and still know who they were. You knew their personalities after a while, and the writers cared enough to make those personalities consistent. Also, I would argue the Legion of Superheroes' #1 claim to pop culture reference is that Otto Binder created a character called Brainiac 5. The number indicating that he was some sort of descendant of the Brainiac who plagued Superman in the 20th century. And I say some sort of because, of course, that Brainiac was a robot. It's a little bit confusing. And it's dealt with in a number of different ways by different Legion artists. But since then, the term Brainiac has entered popular parlance as, an ostentatiously brainy person is a Brainiac. And I would argue, most of the people in America who use that term have no idea where it comes from. They have no idea that they're actually doing a Legion roll call. And storylines progressed, and just as we've seen in Wednesday Comics, the Legion was every bit as susceptible as any other superhero comic book to great runs, where suddenly some magic starts to happen between a writer and an artist, and issue by issue, you've got a run that is not going to last forever, but that is fantastic. The Legion has had a number of those over the years. I had optimism. I was kind of hoping that the latest incarnation of the Legion might have one of those to save it from the muddle of its original writing, but it got canceled instead, so I don't have to worry about that. But fortunately, as you saw in Michael K. Vaughan's video, I'll leave a link to his video down below, but as you saw in his video, he held up a gigantic 2-pound omnibus edition, which I also have. I have the Legion digitally, going from 1958 to 2008. So I don't consult that big omnibus as often as I might otherwise have done. It's a hugely heavy thing. But as you can tell from that, DC Comics has at least embraced the idea of reprinting all of those great honored issues and serving them up for Legion fans who will buy them. You give Legion fans any kind of reprint culture and they'll buy it. And they'll buy it in sufficient numbers to make it worth your while to do that. Hence a huge Legion volume 5 years later saga, which one of you was kind enough to send me. Good Lord, what a gift. I would go back to it all the time. I imagine that the big $120 hardcover omnibus editions of the Legion backstories will keep going. I imagine that will be true. And I will probably be tempted to get them. It's a lot less tempting when they're right on your tablet, so that if I'm sprawled in bed and I've got my little dog on me and I don't want to get up and move, and I'm finished with the night's reading, I feel like reading an old issue of the Legion, I can just call it up on the same device. I don't have to go anywhere. But that's our comic for today. And I'm obviously not going to make any bones about this, that DC Comics right now, for a complex system of legal reasons, mostly their own fault, don't, I believe, have the legal right to publish Superboy, The Adventures of Superman when he was a boy. Teenage Clark Kent in the Superman costume. I don't believe they have the right to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why they have revamped their continuity so that such a person never existed. It leaves those of us who are fans of that character for 50 years a little bit high and dry. But even so, even though I will never read another adventure of a costume Clark Kent, teenage Clark Kent, I will never read another adventure, in other words, of my Legion of Superheroes, I'm still a big fan of the whole thing and all of its iterations. And those reprint volumes mean I will be revisiting those iterations for the rest of DC's life as a corporation, all 3 years of it. But I'm not going to make any secret of the fact, since DC can't publish Superboy anymore, I'm not going to make any real secret of the fact that the Legion of Superheroes is the pinnacle of my comic book affection. There's nothing I like more, aside from the Superboy, that I will never get. I will never read a new issue of Adventure Comics with Superboy and Crypto the Superdog just fighting gangsters in Smallville, or having shenanigans at school or with his parents or whatnot. I'll never read even a modern take on that, some of which could be really good. Instead, the Superboy that we have now wears a black skin-tight t-shirt and is a clone. of Superman and Lex Luthor. And interesting, I guess, in a theoretical way, but not my Superboy. And since I won't get that, the closest I will come to my original love for any kind of comic book is the Legion of Superheroes. So I'm very glad that we kicked off DC with this particular thing. I joked with Michael that my video would be 5 hours long, and I could go on. I could do an hour for every iteration of the Legion, and there have been many of them. But I will wrap up this video here just by saying it's all downhill from here. Sooner or later, I can feel it coming. Sooner or later, Michael is going to give vent to the Achilles heel, the Green Lantern yellow of DC Comics, which is that every single male DC fan loves Batman. They just love Batman. I know that's coming. I can feel it coming. We'll see. Maybe he'll postpone it for a little. Maybe he'll do me the favor of dealing with very early Justice League, or even the Justice Society. But whatever it is, if we're continuing to do DC Comics at least for the rest of this month, I'm on board, absolutely. Far more so than Marvel with its superheroes on Freudian therapy couches. So I'm going to wrap up this. That is the Legion of Superheroes. It's not for beginners. It's not for a newcomer to the comic book world. But oh boy, is it a favorite of mine right from the beginning. So this was a great deal of fun. And we'll reconvene next Wednesday, and we'll see what fiendish plan Michael has in store for us. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.